Where am I? I'm in my backyard with Jody and
Jenna.
And Chick Colony from the Harrisville town. I mean, you're pretty much it. But we are here today to do a little bit of history about historic Harrisville and where it all started, where it's gone, some of the highs, some of the lows, how the water has made a difference, all kinds of things. So, Chick, I think the story is going to be pretty much up to you.
Okay.
Okay.
We probably should start at the beginning. The town is here because the water's here.
Yes.
And when this part of New Hampshire was settled in the 1775, right around the time of the Revolutionary War and after, this was where we're standing was part of Dublin, and Nelson was on the other side of the village. And the people who settled here all were born in this country. Surprising to all of us.
Yeah, that is interesting.
We all grew up thinking they got off boats, came
Right.
up here with a little hatchet and chopped out a farm. Didn't work that way. In this section of what was Dublin, of the 30 original settlers, 29 had been born in this country.
Wow, that's
And
wonderful.
what happened was they, I speculated on this a little bit. I think it became safer for Europeans to come here after the war, or more conservative people came. They got off boats. They went to Rhode Island, Cape Cod, Connecticut River Valley, and they purchased existing farms. Those people were displaced by those people coming in. And they came up into this area with farming in their heads, because that's what they've been doing for thousands of years, but also money in their pockets, because they had sold their places.
Right.
And when the opportunity came to do something different from farming, and this wasn't an easy place to farm, they immediately took to it. So what triggered the whole thing was the War of 1812 and the British blockading the coast, so no goods could come in from Europe. So local manufacturing got started. Even in this area, on every little stream that had a fall of water, there was a grist mill or a sawmill or something like that. And here in Harrisville, there was a sawmill at the head of the stream, and it was owned by the Twitchell family. It came here in the 1770s. Their daughter married one of the Harrises. The Harrises all came from Rhode Island, and they had a farm at the end of the pond. And in 1815, Bethuel Harris and his wife started carding wool in her father's sawmill. And most of the woolen mills actually started in grist mills or sawmills.
Right.
My own family was doing exactly the same thing in a sawmill on the corner of West and Island Street in Keene. The Ashwellet River had a little fall there. There was a sawmill, and they started a woolen mill in that location, which is now the Colony Mill Marketplace, but it was the Faulkner and Colony Mill. Anyway, the Harrises started in around 1815, took wool from local farmers, carded it and spun it, gave it back to them, and people wove in their homes. They liked that idea. They built a mill around 1820. It's no longer standing. They built another mill in 1832.
Where was the one in 1820 that's no longer here?
Just up the stream from where we are, and
Okay.
just below the upper mill.
Okay.
This particular building we're standing in was built by Cyrus Harris in the 1840s,
And this
late
is mill number
1840s.
1 that we're standing in here.
In Cheshire Mills Complex, this is called mill number 1. They're numbered by age. So mill number 1 was built by Cyrus Harris, and he had a partner named Asa Greenwood, who had a quarry in Marlborough. He's responsible for most of the nice brick stone buildings
really?
around here. And he was promoting stone as a fireproof building material. So he and Cyrus Harris built this building between 1848 and 1849 in that area. Cyrus Harris died a month before it was finished. My great-great-grandfather, Josiah Colony, who was involved in Keene, had 5 sons. He wanted to have a mill of their own, so they were out from that partnership. So he came out here and bought this mill from Cyrus Harris's widow in 1849.
Okay, I never knew there was a connection between the
Yep.
two mills in terms of family.
My family then built the mill number 2 to the south of this building, the boarding house. Sort of Harrisville had its sort of second building period.
Okay.
The first building period was 1820 to 1835, when the Harrises really built the village as we know, the upper part of the village. And then the lower part here was built by my family. The nice thing about water power is it drove exactly how not only where the village is, but how the buildings are arranged, how big the buildings are, and how big the town is. Because once the water reaches the bottom of the hill,
It's gone.
there's no more power.
That's
Right.
it, yeah.
So that's it. So it
Yeah.
stays a
Right.
small town.
Yeah.
And I always remember as a child going to Lawrence and Lowell thinking, oh, these people must be a lot smarter than we are. Their mills are bigger.
Yeah.
And it took me 20 years to figure out, no, they have a big river, so they have big mills. We have a little
Right.
river, so we have little mills.
Right.
And it was an incredibly well-matched and organic relationship between the natural resource, the river, and the built resource, the mills. So it really worked well together. The people that worked in the mills, in the big industrial centers like Lawrence and Lowell, they always had other people coming in to work. In places like Harrisville and Keene, it was the local people who gave up farming and came into the mills to work.
Now, were those the people, you said there was a boarding house across the street? Were those the people that then would stay in the boarding house, or were those people from outside that would come for a period of time, stay in the boarding house, and then maybe move on?
Most of them stayed for some period of time. You had to have three things to start a woolen mill in 1825. You had to have power.
Yep.
We've already talked about that. You had to have some capital. They had that because they sold their farms. And you had to have labor. And labor was the scarcest of the three resources.
Okay.
So the mill owners figured out right away, how are we going to get labor?
Yeah.
Now, a sawmill and grist mill, it's a guy and his
Right.
two sons
Right.
running a sawmill.
Right.
The river runs out of water. They take off and do something else. They go hunting, they cut
Right.
trees. The river freshens up, they come back and start sawing the logs again. If you have a woolen mill and you have 30 employees and now the river runs dry, what are you going to do?
Right.
You can't say, go home and I'll ring the bell when we're ready to
Right.
work again.
Yeah.
So they had to have a stable workforce, and that required stable power.
Right.
So the stable workforce came about because they built tenements and boarding houses to entice people to come from
come
the
here,
farms
right.
and live here. And they were paying them cash for their labor, and then the people were then sending the cash home to their farming families who were working in a bartered economy. So it was a very young group of people that came. I mean, we were looking at the census for 1830 for the Harris boarding house. Boarding houses are half women, half men. There were, I think, 35 people living in the boarding house in that time, and the oldest person was 28 years old.
Wow. I knew they were young. That's
So it
one
was-
thing I was familiar with, is a lot of like young men and women
Yeah.
would come because it was a great source of cash for their family, like you said, send it back
Yeah.
to the farm.
Yeah.
So they were single mostly,
Right.
right? And then
They were.
oftentimes, from what I understand, as folks met and got married, they would move out and do something different, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
But the mill owners were very careful about their employees. They had schools for them. They made sure that it wasn't a free-for-all. And they took care of it. It was very,
Yeah, it was more like college, and maybe
Yeah.
being in a dorm and having rules as to
little
what
bit,
you needed
yeah,
to do. And,
yeah.
But having everything here too, because you had a store.
Yeah.
So they really didn't have to travel a whole lot, although you did have a train in the area.
yeah. The power, ordering the power, so you had it in a dependable thing, was really trickier because it's not so much power do you have, but how many days a year can you use it?
Right.
And so somebody in Massachusetts figured out around 1825 that all the water that falls in the watershed is going to the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
Eventually, you can't stop it.
Nope.
But if you can manage it better, you can use it better. So they built dams and reservoirs to act like storage batteries.
So they could, when things were low water-wise, naturally,
That's right.
then they could let it go and have
That's
some,
right.
yeah.
So you stored a lot of water and you use a little bit every day. You don't want the water to run at night, for example. It's obvious because you don't have
Right.
any lights. So you can't run your factory at night, so you
Yeah.
want the water to stop.
Right.
But it's all going down there.
Yeah.
Eventually. I mean, and the nice thing about water power is it gets used over and over as it goes down these
Right.
falls to the water that turned the turbines in this building also turned turbines in Peterborough.
Right.
And then Hillsborough.
Right.
And then
All down the line.
Pennacook.
Right.
All
Right.
the way down, and then
Yep.
Manchester and Lowell.
Right. So the water came from the Harrisville Pond and other ponds up above,
Yep.
like you were just saying. Now, it went down, and what was Scatutucky used for then?
Scatutucky was a reservoir for the mills in Peterborough.
Yeah, okay.
Almost, and that's what changed the whole face of New Hampshire were these reservoirs.
Right.
Because we have the perfect, although we had bad farming, we had perfect rocky and clay soil.
Yep.
So when you build a dam and raise the pond 15 feet, it doesn't all just sink into the ground.
Right.
So if you go to Vermont and build a dam, the water goes into the ground. Here, it just stays in the reservoir until you want to use it. And that was obvious in the hurricane. I mean, they didn't get that much rain in Vermont, but they have no place to put
Right,
it. There are no
right.
reservoirs. So yeah, all the rain that came had to go down the streams, and
Yep.
we all saw last fall what happened,
happened,
last
right, yep.
August.
Yep.
Here, when we have a hurricane, we have hopefully the reservoirs as low as possible, and we can
Right.
store a lot of the water that
Yeah.
comes.
So it doesn't do
Yeah.
as much damage, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So then after they had, at what point was it you said that they then were, sort of figured out, let's build some reservoirs and dams and then have more year-round water power? Was that
Right
18?
away. They figured it out
So it was,
right away.
okay, so it was like 1820s?
Yeah, the Harrises were building the dams in the late 1820s.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
And they kept improving the dams because the more water you could store, the more power you could get.
So at its height, how many people lived in the boarding house and worked in the mills?
Well, there were 5 boarding houses, so there were a lot of people.
Oh, there were,
But
okay.
in 1870, which is sort of the high point, over 1,000 people lived in the village of Harrisville.
Mm-hmm.
And probably 400 worked in the mills.
Okay,
And then it was all a local industry.
Right.
I mean, they got wool from local sheep farmers. They made it into cloth in these mills, and they sold it in Keene and Peterborough.
Right.
In fact, the biggest market was the Cheshire Fair.
so in terms of where the sheep were they all around this area
Yeah.
near Harrisville, or were they farther out?
They were all around here.
Okay.
So
Hancock and Harrisville.
most of this land was all
Cleared.
deforested, right?
Right.
And it had the stone walls, so they would block off the boundaries with that.
Yeah.
So how many farms, like was everybody farming
Yeah.
and doing sheeping?
Everybody who wasn't working in the mills was doing farming
Right.
to support the mills.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Lumber,
Yeah.
firewood, and wool.
Yep.
And then after the Civil War and the railroads came, everything changed. The markets opened up further west and other places, and also you could bring wool in from the west.
But during the Civil War, that was probably a big boom. I think it was in Keene.
It was, yeah.
I don't know if it was here, but
Yeah. That's where the mills really
prospered.
prospered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the Civil War, before the Civil War, a mill like this one would have made 50 different fabrics
And it was all local.
to service a local market.
Right.
Everybody wanted something a little different.
Right.
The Civil War comes along, all of a sudden everybody's going to mass produce for the first time. Nobody knew what that was going to be like. And it was very, very profitable because the price of wool was fixed, the price of cloth was fixed.
Right.
And
And then after the Civil War, when the railroads opened up the West, then how did things change at that point? How
Well,
quickly did they change? Pretty quickly?
everybody who wanted to really farm headed west.
Okay,
So then the people who stayed behind didn't have so much to do.
Okay.
So the scarcity of labor after the Civil War went away. So most mill owners sold their boarding houses and tenements and just kept the mills.
Okay.
And as the industry ran downhill, and it's been sort of going downhill since the Civil War, the towns ran down with it.
okay.
Right.
So the mill owner no longer maintained the whole town. Now in Harrisville, I don't know why, but in my family's case, they continue to own all the tenements and boarding houses.
Okay.
Which is lucky.
It was
Because
pure luck.
you are now one of the only mill towns that are left.
Right. So when the mill finally closed in 1970, the mill itself still owned half the structures in town,
Okay.
which was a tremendous opportunity.
It is.
Yeah.
And the arrangement was the mill would maintain the roof of the building and the tenants could maintain the interior. Some of the tenants lived there for 50 years,
Oh, really?
but never would change it because it wasn't
Right.
their house.
Right.
And so the mill kept the water out.
Right.
The tenants didn't change the inside. So in 1970, some of these places were in mint condition from a historic preservation point of view.
Right, right.
So it really made an opportunity great. And when the mill closed, a lot of us got together and thought, okay, what's next? We were on a little bypass off a highway.
Right.
Right.
People in Keene and Peterborough today don't know where Harrisville is,
Yep.
which is a good thing. And, and in 1970, people really weren't sure
Right.
what was going to happen. Something had to be different. Most of the people, and almost half the people who lived in town had no cars. Because you could live here. This is what a village really is. It's a miniature city. You can
Right.
shop, you go to school, you can recreate, and you can work, all within walking distance.
Right.
And that's when we realized what was at stake here. That's what we were trying to preserve, sort of a working village. And we had a lot of old buildings to worry about also. So we tried to figure out, okay, how do we put the town back on its feet again? And it had always been a place where people lived and worked, so we
Right.
wanted to put it to work. And luckily for us, Filtrine Manufacturing moved up here from New Jersey, and for 30 years ran a business here. So Historic Harrisville dealt with some other smaller buildings on the side. Filtrine worried about the big complex.
Right.
And Historic Harrisville didn't have to worry about that until 1999 when Filtrine also moved to Keene.
Right.
And then Historic Harrisville
That's
stepped
when
up.
that happened. It was before
Right.
my time in Keene.
Yeah.
Right.
I knew it was there, but I didn't know when it got there.
So they carried a big load for a long time here.
Right. Well, you were lucky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are. And Historic Harrisville came up with the concept early on that there was no money here to do the preservation, that the buildings themselves would have to earn their keep.
Oh, I see.
So the idea was we fix up a building like this, we heat it, we insulate it, we don't spend a great deal of money on it, everything's been done on a shoestring, and then we rent it out.
Okay.
And the rent a tenant gives us for this space
Pays for.
pays the taxes, pays the upkeep, pays the management of it, and the buildings are literally paying their own way.
And these are beautiful spaces now. A
Yeah.
lot of the floors have been redone. You've re-sheet rocked. Structurally, it looks like you've put in a lot of supports and things like that. So everything is very sound. If anybody wanted to learn more about it, they can contact you folks. We'll give it an email. We'll give a website address at some
And we
point.
have about 50 different tenants now.
Mm-hmm.
We have income of over almost $400,000 a year. For a nonprofit, that's different to have
Right.
income.
Right.
Because we don't depend on tourism. In fact,
Right.
we absolutely discourage tourism.
Right.
We have our share of tourists, like all the towns around here. It's a beautiful
Right.
place, and it's a public place. But we don't like to be on the back cover of Yankee
Right.
Magazine or something like
Right, but you are, because it's so picturesque. You see
Yeah.
it everywhere. But, this is something that people should bring their kids out to. I know that you don't want a lot of tourists, but we're all locals
Yeah.
that are watching this show pretty much. And bring your kids out, and it's not that far. It's 20 or 25 minutes out of Keene, and you can feel like it was back in the mid-1800s.
Well, and it's what I find really interesting about a place like this is you can bring your kids out and kind of explain to them how water power worked back then.
Right.
The renewable aspect of it, like you say, about how the same water that powered things back, in Harrisville then powered things again downstream. And that's something I feel like in the schools now, we do pieces of Keene history and things like that. And for kids to be able to see that, you see some of it in Keene, but to be able to then come somewhere else and say, look, these streams and rivers go to other places which did the same sorts of things.
Right.
It's nice to be just to walk around and to see how that all works.
And your family still has the rights to the water, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's up to you to have to do everything to...
What does that mean to have the rights to the water? I'm just curious.
It means when they blew the whistle, you were still in the room and everybody else left.
They were smart. No.
Yeah.
No, but somebody had to do it, and it's nice that you folks are continuing.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue.
It is, yeah.
I took a group of kids and we studied this stream from Spoonwood Pond in Nelson all the way down to downtown Peterborough.
Oh, really?
And we picked the year 1870. We graphed the waterfall. We went out to every place where it dropped. We saw what was there. These buildings are still here. Most of them are gone further downstream and upstream. And we calculated by doing some historical research that over 1,000 people in 1870 drew their livelihood from this little stream.
Wow.
So that was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And New Hampshire reached its industrial peak around 1920 before electricity came.
Right.
So every morning, sluice gates opened up, a small vibration started, and then the mighty roar brought
Right.
New Hampshire to its upstanding.
All day.
Right.
And we did all that without any imported energy of any kind.
Right.
Yeah.
So we always forget, that what do we do without oil?
We could do
Did
it.
all right.
Yeah.
It happened.
Yeah.
It was cool,
Yeah.
much
It's just
smaller
a matter
scale.
of thinking.
Smaller
Yeah.
scale.
And I don't
absolutely,
think, water power isn't going to solve our problem, but
No.
it should be part of what's going
Yep.
forward.
I agree.
Right. There's all kinds of things that we can do. We just have to think about it.
Right.
And,
Well, and that's
maybe
where-
think back at what has happened in the past that might be able to be brought back.
Well,
that
and
can
that's
help
why I
us now.
say, working with kids and showing kids how that works, there's no limit to their imaginations.
Right.
Whereas sometimes when we get into our adult ways of thinking,
Right.
we're like, no, this is the way it's done. There's no other way.
Right.
But some kid somewhere, could come up with some good ideas and get inspired by these things.
That's
and
right.
Right.
Go ahead
Right.
from there.
Well, Harrisville's significant, not because of what it was, but because it has survived. There were over 300 villages like Harrisville in New England at that time,
Right.
1830. Most of them are gone for reasons we've already touched on. But Harrisville's still here. And it's a National Historic Landmark because it symbolizes the change from agriculture to industry. And a lot of people who study American studies feel this is the most critical moment in our history because we became an industrial. Until 10 years ago, we were an industrial
Right.
country,
Right.
not an agricultural one.
Right.
And it was the decision-making and the planning that went on when those farmers threw down their hoes and picked up their wrenches that changed the whole country. And it happened in places like Harrisville.
And it's still here.
Yeah.
And it may be happening more because look at where we're going. You
Yeah.
just don't know, but
Yeah.
it's not really working right now. So we've got to do some things to
Right.
change things.
Well, it's like the local agriculture movement right now.
Right.
It's popping up all over the
Right.
place,
Right.
and we're just seeing the beginning, the
Right.
tip of the iceberg, I
Right,
think.
Right.
So farming has a future in New England. I mean, we still have fabulous farming land. It's just that it's not big-scale farming land.
Right.
Right, right. But people can do anything. I mean, they can have their own little plots. They can start little businesses just like they did in the past. And I think that's where we might be slowly heading towards is being sustainable on your own and starting out like your family did,
Right.
small and maybe building larger. But, who knows? There's just so much that we need to think about for the future. And it's great that you still have all of this in your family because if you didn't, you wouldn't have all of these beautiful buildings. They would have been knocked down. a few years back, you were melting, people were melting things out, taking the stuff out of the buildings, cleaning them out.
Yeah.
And now we realize, wow, what we've lost.
Yeah. My father had chances to sell the bricks, some of the buildings, before the mill closed. And
Yep.
by 1970, textiles was in
Right.
not very good shape.
That's
and
right.
people were grabbing at everything. And
Right.
He could have done that.
Yeah.
Luckily for us, he didn't.
That you're
Yeah.
very, very correct.
Yeah.
So we've been in my backyard today with Chick Colony and Jenna, and we will be in my backyard in another location next time. If you'd like to contact us and give us your ideas or your suggestions, you can contact us at inmybackyardch8@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you, answer any of your questions. And it's just wonderful that we have so much in the Monadnock region. The list is, I say this all the time, but it's endless as to what we can talk about because we are so lucky to live where we live. So thank you, Chick.
Okay.
Jenna, we'll
Yeah,
see
thank
where
you
we
very
are
much.
next.
Yep. See you next time.
See you in my backyard.